Thunder rattled the windows of the Wren Ranch as dusk spilled its ink across the endless prairie. The old house shuddered with each flash of lightning, boards groaning, roof tiles clattering, and rain driven sideways by the storm's fury. Eli Wren stood at his kitchen window, mug of bitter coffee cradled in both hands, watching water carve rivers through the dust outside. It had been years since the prairie had seen a storm like this, and years longer since Eli had felt anything but the slow ache of loss. He was a rugged man in his early 50s, face weathered by sun and grief, eyes gray as the sky tonight. The scars on his arms spoke of old wars, both in distant deserts and closer to home, losses that still echoed in the empty rooms of the ranch house. Since his wife passed, Eli had lived alone, speaking more to his mustang, Storm, than to any living soul. Tonight, though, something was different. A prickling at the back of his neck that told him trouble was coming, riding in on the wind. A crash. Not thunder. Louder, sharper, something hitting the front porch. Eli set his mug down, grabbed his lantern, and slid the Colt from the top drawer just in case. He stepped onto the porch, rain soaking his boots in seconds. The wind nearly tore the door from his grip, and for a second, the darkness seemed to pulse with danger. Then, lightning ripped open the night. Eli saw her, a woman, slumped against the porch post, clutching a bundled infant to her chest. Her hair was plastered to her face, her clothes torn and caked with mud. She was shivering so violently, Eli thought she might shake apart. The baby's cry was a thin, desperate sound, almost lost in the howl of the storm. "Ma'am?" Eli called, voice gravelly. No answer, just a small moan. He moved quickly, holstering his pistol and crouching beside her. Her skin was clammy, her lips blue. The baby, no, a little girl, was barely stirring, cheeks streaked with rain and tears. "Hold on," Eli muttered, as much to himself as to her. He lifted them both, surprised at how light they were. Inside, he laid the woman on the couch, wrapping her and the child in every blanket he could find. The storm raged on, but inside the house, the world narrowed to the struggle for warmth and breath. Eli worked with the calm of someone who'd seen too much. He stoked the fire, found his wife's old teapot, boiled water, mixed sugar, and a pinch of salt. When the woman's eyes fluttered open for a moment, he offered her the drink. "Easy now. You're safe," he lied, knowing nothing was safe this far from town. The woman drank a few sips, then fell back into exhausted sleep. Eli looked down at the baby. "Isabel," the woman had whispered, barely audible. "Please help. Isabel." Eli felt something stir in his chest. A duty, maybe, or the memory of love. He checked the baby for fever, found none, but saw bruises on the woman's arms when he adjusted the blanket. His jaw tightened. This wasn't just a case of travelers caught in the rain. As the night dragged on, the wind dropped, but Eli's worry grew. At one point, headlights swept across the distant fields. A truck, moving too slowly to be out for a neighborly visit. Eli doused the lantern, crouched beside the window, pistol ready. The truck crawled past, engine rumbling, paused at the end of his drive. Eli's heart hammered in his chest. A spotlight flicked on, searching, sweeping over the barn, the Mustang paddock, then the house. Storm, his Mustang, stamped and whinnied in the barn, restless. Eli whispered a soft reassurance, and Storm quieted, but the tension hung thick. The truck idled for a long minute, then rolled on. Eli let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He spent the rest of the night watching over his unexpected guests, every sound outside a threat. Every shadow on the wall another reason to keep the colt close. Just before dawn, footsteps crunched on the porch. This time Eli didn't hesitate. He slipped outside, careful to close the door behind him. Standing in the gray light was Sheriff Maddox, tall, broad-shouldered, mustache bristling with suspicion. "Morning, Eli," the sheriff called, voice low. "We're looking for a woman and a baby. Folks say they might be running from trouble, dangerous trouble." "You seen anything tonight?" Eli looked him dead in the eye. "Nothing but the storm, Sheriff. Was a rough one." The sheriff studied Eli for a long moment, eyes narrow. "You sure? If you're hiding fugitives, it'll mean trouble for you too. Big trouble." Eli nodded, forcing himself to breathe slow. "You know I mind my own business. Ain't nobody come through here." Inside, the woman and child slept, oblivious. Eli held the sheriff's gaze, willing him to move on. After a tense pause, Maddox grunted, "You let me know if you see anything. Town's on edge. Rewards posted. Folks might do something stupid." He tipped his hat and left, boots splashing through the mud. Eli watched until the sheriff was gone, then went back inside. As dawn broke over the prairie, Eli realized everything had changed. By taking in this stranger and her child, he'd thrown himself against the tide of danger, and he didn't even know their names. But the look of fear on the woman's face, the bruises on her arms, and the way she clung to her daughter told him he had done the only thing a decent man could. Out in the barn, Storm nickered softly, as if sensing the house would need every ounce of courage it could muster in the days to come. A pink-orange dawn bled slowly across the prairie, painting the battered fences and muddy pasture with the soft colors of hope. But inside Eli Wren's old farmhouse, the mood was anything but calm. Callie woke with a gasp, eyes darting wildly, as if she expected to see the shadow of her pursuers standing over her. Her first instinct was to check for Isabel. The little girl, bundled in a nest of old quilts on the couch, whimpered in her sleep. Callie relaxed only slightly, pulling her child into her arms, then winced. Eli, setting a chipped mug of coffee on the table nearby, noticed the way she flinched. "You're safe here," he said. His voice was gentle, but there was a warning behind it, an unspoken question about the bruises that trailed from her jaw down her neck and the haunted look in her eyes. Callie sat upright, clutching Isabel tightly. She watched Eli with suspicion, her posture defensive. "You shouldn't have helped us," she whispered, as if the words might summon danger right through the walls. Eli sat across from her, hands wrapped around his coffee. "You want to tell me what you're running from?" He didn't ask out of curiosity. It was the question of a man who needed to know just how deep a mess he'd stepped in. Callie hesitated, eyes fixed on the dark wood floor. For a long moment, Eli thought she might refuse, but then something in her seemed to break. "My name's Callie," she said quietly. "My husband's family. They're not good people. He died owing them more money than I can count. I tried to pay them back, but..." She stopped, eyes brimming with old pain and new panic. "When he died, they said Isabel and I belonged to them, for the debts. They want to take my little girl. I had to run." Eli's face hardened. He'd seen men like that in his soldier days, men who used family as leverage, who believed violence and fear were currency. He believed Callie, even if her story was jagged and raw. Outside Storm, Eli's Mustang whinnied. He always got restless when strangers or trouble were near. Eli looked out the window, half expecting to see headlights or silhouettes, but the yard was empty. Still, The tension in the air felt like a storm refusing to leave. After breakfast, Eli saddled Storm and rode the perimeter. In the muddy lane just beyond his property, he found boot prints, fresh. Several men, judging by the depth and spacing. He cursed under his breath and checked the fence line. One post had been loosened, and a strip of Eli's old shirt hung from a barb, almost as if someone wanted him to know they'd been there. When he returned, Callie was pacing, her face pale and set with determination. "You should have let us go," she said, voice trembling. "Now you're in danger, too." Eli shook his head. "Nobody's chasing you off my land. You and your little girl stay put. But if you want to help, you can mend the porch rail or feed Storm. I won't have dead weight here." The gruffness in his tone was a shield against fear, against the way Callie's desperation pulled at old memories of his wife's illness and all the times he'd been powerless to help. Later that morning, the phone rang, rare enough to set Eli's nerves jangling. He picked up to the sound of neighbor Tom's hurried voice. "Eli, just a heads up. There's a poster in town. Woman and baby, big reward. Folks say the sheriff's been asking questions. Some rough-looking strangers were poking around the store this morning. Said they're hunting for a runaway." Eli's jaw tightened. "Appreciate it, Tom. Keep your doors locked." He glanced at Callie, who had overheard enough to know things were getting worse. Isabel cried, as if sensing the fear in the adults around her. Callie tried to soothe her, singing softly, her voice cracking. Not long after, a dusty pickup rolled down the drive. Eli recognized the sheriff's badge gleaming behind the windshield. Sheriff Maddox was back, and this time, he didn't bother knocking. He stepped inside, boots muddy, hat in hand. His gaze swept the kitchen, lingered a fraction too long on the pile of blankets on the couch, on Callie's pale face and Isabel's frightened eyes. "You sure you haven't seen anyone, Eli?" Maddox said, voice heavy with suspicion. "Town's real stirred up. Some folks are saying you got visitors." Eli squared his shoulders, blocking the sheriff's view. "Just me and Storm, same as always. I don't like gossip in my house, Sheriff." The tension was thick enough to cut. Maddox took a slow walk around the room, letting his silence do the talking. "You know hiding a fugitive is prison time," he said at last. "Doesn't matter what her story is." Eli met his eyes, steel for steel. "If someone's in trouble, I'd hope you'd do more than just chase a reward. You ever think maybe she's running for a reason?" Maddox looked like he might argue, but he backed off, at least for now. "Just remember what I said, Eli. There's a line between being a good man and being a fool." He left, and the house felt smaller, as if the walls themselves were closing in. That night, the real danger came. A trio of men, led by a woman with cold, sharp eyes, Blair, appeared at the edge of the yard. Blair's voice cut through the dark. "We know she's in there, Wren. You hand her and the kid over, or we torch this place and drag you out with the ashes." Eli's heart pounded. He stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand. Refusing to show fear. "You got no business here. Leave before things get ugly." Blair's thugs took a step forward, hands twitching near their guns. But Storm, sensing the danger, reared up, whinnying with a fury Eli had never seen. The Mustang's wild presence sent the thugs stumbling back, and Blair snarled in frustration. "You can't hide forever," she shouted, before vanishing into the darkness. Eli stood guard all night, Storm patrolling the paddock. Inside, Callie huddled with Isabel, tears streaking her cheeks. She knew there was no place left to hide. But as dawn broke, Eli realized one thing. Sometimes you have to fight for what's right. Even when it means putting everything on the line. Sunlight spilled over the Wren Ranch, glinting off dew-damp grass and the battered picket fence. But inside, the air was thick with suspicion and unease. Eli Wren moved about his morning chores with a quiet intensity, his mind turning over every word, every glance from the night before. Callie and her daughter Isabel were still strangers under his roof, and even now, with daylight bringing a thin veneer of safety, he wondered if he'd just thrown gasoline on a pile of old tinder. In the kitchen, Callie stood by the window, her eyes tracking the horizon, as if expecting Blair and her men to burst through the trees at any moment. Her face, marked with the fading bruises of her past, was set with a determination Eli found both admirable and exhausting. Isabel played at her mother's feet, clutching a battered rag doll Callie must have stuffed in her bag when they fled. Eli's footsteps were heavy on the wooden floor. "If you're going to stay here," he said finally, "there's work needs doing. I won't have idleness, not with trouble sniffing at the door." Callie straightened, bracing herself as if for a blow. "I never asked for your charity," she snapped, her pride wounded, her jaw tight. "I can pull my weight. I'll do whatever needs doing." Eli nodded once, a flicker of respect breaking through his usual gruffness. "Good. Fences need mending, and Storm'll need feeding and grooming. I'll show you how we do things here. You watch the kid while I get the tools." Outside, the morning was peaceful, a lull that felt as fragile as spun glass. Eli led Callie through the barn, introducing her to the daily routine. Hauling buckets, gathering eggs, mending broken boards, Callie worked in silence. Sleeves rolled up, sweat tracing the scars on her arms. She glanced at Eli sometimes, as if weighing whether to trust him with another piece of her battered story. It was Storm, Eli's loyal mustang, who first broke the ice. The horse had always been wary of strangers, but when Callie approached with slow, careful movements and a handful of oats, Storm lowered his great head and sniffed her hand. Isabel watched from the doorway, eyes wide with a mix of fear and fascination. Storm seemed to sense the child's uncertainty and sidled closer. To everyone's surprise, Isabel reached out, her tiny fingers tangling in the Mustang's coarse mane. For the first time since her arrival, a smile broke across Callie's face, fragile as new grass after a wildfire. "See that?" Eli said quietly. "He don't take to just anyone." Callie's smile faded quickly, replaced by wariness. "He's smart. Animals know things about people, things we hide from each other." Eli didn't argue. He watched as Callie showed Isabel how to brush Storm's coat, the child giggling at the horse's warm breath on her cheeks. It was a small moment of peace, a reminder of the normal life Callie must have lost and the normal life Eli once had. As the day wore on, Callie proved herself handy and tough. She fixed a sagging fence, boiled potatoes for supper, even managed to coax a smile from Eli when she scolded him for letting Storm chew through a whole bucket of oats. In the quiet hours between chores, she sat on the porch with Isabel in her lap, singing old lullabies, her voice barely louder than the breeze, but the tension never fully left. That night, as Eli was locking up the barn, he found Callie in the shadows, turning something over in her hands. A silver locket, scuffed and scratched. "It was my husband's," she said, sensing his presence. "He gave it to me before he got mixed up with his family's business. He used to be gentle. After he died, they came after me. Said I owed them, like I was just another debt to be paid." Eli said nothing, but his silence was full of understanding. He knew what it was to lose someone, to be left alone with only ghosts for company. A man's family can be a curse as much as a blessing, he finally replied. Callie glanced at him, studying the lines on his face. "Why did you help us?" she asked, her voice trembling. "You could have turned us in, saved yourself all this trouble." Eli looked away. The memories of his wife and the long, lonely years crashing over him. "My wife used to say, 'You don't turn away from folks who need you. Not out here. Not ever.'" His voice cracked. "I reckon I owe her that much." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Callie nodded, her suspicion melting, just a little. She tucked the locket into her pocket and went inside. Over the next few days, trust, fragile as a new shoot, began to take root. They worked together, Eli showing Callie how to fix tack, repair fences, keep the ranch running. Callie, in turn, taught Isabel how to help with chores, her laughter ringing through the dusty yard. Still, not everything was smooth. Sometimes Callie's temper flared when Eli tried to take charge, and sometimes Eli's patience frayed when Callie second-guessed his every move. But the fights, short and sharp, always ended with a grudging respect, a truce, if not yet a friendship. Storm became the glue that held the uneasy trio together. He watched over Isabel, nosing her gently when she wandered too close to trouble, and kept a wary eye on the horizon, ready to sound the alarm at the first sign of danger. At night, when the prairie was quiet and the only sound was the creak of the windmill, Eli sat on the porch, rifle across his knees, listening for footsteps in the dark. Inside, Callie and Isabel slept side by side, Storm dozing in the barn. They were not yet a family, but in the shelter of hard work and watchful silence, they were, slowly, stubbornly, becoming something like it. And as another storm gathered on the horizon, Eli knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. The prairie settled into a brittle, anxious calm as summer deepened. The storms seemed to have passed, but Eli knew better than to trust quiet spells. Out here, peace never lasted. Still, in the days that followed, something shifted in the old house. The routine of chores and small talk began to fill in the cracks left by years of grief and memories, long buried under dust and silence, started to surface. One evening, as the sun faded behind a line of distant cottonwoods, Eli found himself sitting at the kitchen table with Callie. Isabel slept on the couch, cheeks pink from sun and play, Storm resting outside the window with one eye open. Eli poured 2 cups of weak coffee, sliding one across the table to Callie, who accepted it with a nod of thanks. Eli stared into his cup, thinking of the past. The light in the kitchen was soft, golden, catching the dust motes in the air. "You know, this ranch used to be full of people," he said, voice slow. "When my wife was alive, we'd have neighbors over for supper. There was always music, laughter. She brought the place to life." Callie looked at him, surprised by the sudden honesty. She waited, listening. Eli continued, eyes distant. "After she got sick, things changed. I tried to keep it all going, planting, fixing, hoping she'd pull through. She was tough, but cancer's mean. Took her slow, then all at once. After the funeral, people stopped coming by. Guess folks don't know what to say to a man who's lost everything." He gave a rueful smile. "I started talking to Storm more than I talked to people. Horse never judged me for not moving on." Callie wrapped her hands around her mug, her voice barely a whisper. "I know that kind of silence. After my husband died, his family wanted to pretend I never existed, except when they needed something. There was a time he was good to me. He'd sing to Isabel when she was a baby. He even tried to get away from the family business once. She looked down, voice trembling. But his people were greedy. They always wanted more. Money, land, control. When he couldn't deliver, they blamed me, said I was the reason for his weakness. Eli shook his head, anger flickering in his eyes. That's not on you. Sometimes men just make the wrong choices, and it's the women and kids who pay for it. A comfortable silence settled between them. The walls, once thick with tension, now felt a little warmer, almost welcoming. Later that night, after Isabel was tucked in and Storm had been fed, Callie wandered into the small living room. She paused at the mantel, tracing her fingers over framed photographs. Eli's wedding, his wife smiling in a sun hat, a younger Eli with his arm around her shoulders. The ranch green and alive behind them. Callie's eyes stung with tears she didn't dare let fall. Eli joined her, quiet. She loved this place. Never cared much for money, but she'd fight anyone who threatened her home. He chuckled, the sound brittle. First time she met Storm, he tried to buck her off. She got back on 3 times before he gave up. Said he'd never seen a horse so stubborn or a woman. Callie smiled, just a little. You miss her? Eli nodded. Every day. But having you and Isabel here, it's like hearing laughter in these halls again. I'd forgotten what that sounded like. Callie sat, her knees drawn up, and let herself rest for the first time in weeks. I always thought I'd get a second chance. That maybe once we got away, I could start over. Just me and Isabel. But sometimes it feels like running is all I've ever done. Eli considered her words. Starting over's hard, but you're tougher than you think. What you did, running with your kid, fighting for her, that's no small thing. They sat in silence, both lost in thoughts of those they'd lost, and the hopes they still clung to. Outside, the prairie wind picked up, rattling the windows. It sounded almost like a song. The days that followed grew gentler. Isabel, sensing the peace between Eli and her mother, grew braver. She followed Storm around the paddock, her laughter ringing through the morning air. Callie began to take pride in small victories. A fence mended. A loaf of bread risen just right. Isabel's cheeks filling out with every healthy meal. Some evenings, Eli played an old harmonica on the porch. The sad notes floating out over the grass, Callie sometimes sang along, her voice clear and soft. Isabel curled up beside her. It wasn't the life she'd dreamed of, but it was life, real and hard-earned. One afternoon, Callie joined Eli as he repaired the wagon. They worked in companionable silence until Callie finally spoke, her voice low. You ever feel like maybe the only way to move forward is to stop blaming yourself for the past? Eli looked at her, surprised by her vulnerability. Every day, he admitted. But out here, forgiveness comes slow, especially when it's yourself you need to forgive. Callie nodded. I've been running from more than just them. I blamed myself for everything that went wrong, for picking the wrong man, for not leaving sooner, for putting Isabel in danger. Eli rested a calloused hand on her shoulder. We can't change what's behind us. All we can do is make this place, right here, right now, a little better. For ourselves, for our kids. They finished the repairs as the sun dipped low, golden light spilling across the fields. Isabel ran toward them, Storm trotting after her, dust rising at their heels. For a brief, shining moment, It felt like hope, fragile but real. That night, as Callie tucked Isabel into bed, she whispered, "Maybe we found our second chance after all." Eli, sitting outside under a sky littered with stars, let himself believe, if only for a moment, that tomorrow might be brighter than yesterday. In the quiet resolve of two battered souls, a new kind of family was taking root. But peace, Eli knew, was always just the calm before the next storm. The prairie's uneasy calm shattered a few nights later, as if fate itself remembered that peace never came free. The signs were small at first: a slashed fence, a poisoned water trough, storm pawing the ground and snorting at things only a horse could sense. Eli Wren recognized these warnings. This wasn't just harassment. This was a message. He found Callie kneeling by the creek, washing Isabel's clothes on a flat stone. Her hands were red from scrubbing, her eyes distant and troubled. Eli crouched beside her, voice low. "They're close. We need to be ready." Callie's jaw tightened, but she didn't look away. "I won't let them take her, not alive." Eli admired her grit, even as he hated the danger pressing in. "You're not alone," he said simply. "You both stay inside after dark. Keep Isabel where you can see her. I'll handle the rest." That evening, a hush fell over the ranch. Eli double-checked the windows, locked every door, and loaded the shotgun he'd kept hidden since the war. Callie made a show of reading stories to Isabel by lantern light, but her hands shook when she turned the pages. Storm, usually calm, paced his stall, ears flicking at the slightest sound. As the sun disappeared, Eli stood on the porch, scanning the darkness. Out beyond the fence, a pair of headlights blinked on and off, then vanished. A warning, or maybe a promise. Eli's pulse pounded. He couldn't help but recall the sheriff's words. "There's a line between being a good man and being a fool." Just before midnight, it happened. A distant crash split the night. Wood breaking, horses screaming in the barn. Eli dashed outside, Callie behind him, clutching Isabel to her chest. The barn glowed orange inside. Someone had set a stack of hay bales alight. Smoke billowed into the starless sky. "Stay back," Eli ordered, thrusting the rifle at Callie. "If anyone comes near, you shoot." He sprinted into the barn, the heat choking, the flames licking up the old wood walls. Storm reared in his stall, eyes rolling white, but Eli grabbed his halter and dragged him free. He shoved open the paddock gate just as a masked man appeared at the barn door, brandishing a pistol. Eli ducked, grabbing a shovel. He swung hard, catching the man in the ribs. The gun went off, the shot wild. Storm, sensing the threat, charged, teeth bared. The man tumbled backward, crashing through a broken window and into the night. Callie, clutching Isabel, pressed her back against the porch post, finger tight on the rifle trigger. Out of the shadows, Blair appeared, lips curled in a cruel grin. "You're making this hard, Wren." "Hand them over. No one needs to get hurt." Eli stumbled out of the smoke, coughing, blood on his knuckles. "You picked the wrong house, Blair." Blair's eyes glittered. She signaled, and two of her thugs lunged forward, one heading straight for Callie and Isabel. Callie screamed, firing the rifle over their heads. The gunshot scattered the men, but one darted around the porch, grabbing at Isabel. Eli saw red. He sprinted, barreling into the attacker, knocking him down with a crash that echoed through the yard. Callie snatched Isabel away, retreating into the house. Eli grappled with the thug in the dirt, blows flying wild, until Storm, sensing his rider's distress, charged forward. The mustang stomped and kicked, sending the thug scrambling for his life. Blair cursed, backing away as the fire roared behind her. "We'll be back, Ren. Next time you won't be so lucky." She spat in the dirt and melted into the shadows, her men trailing behind. As silence fell, Eli slumped against the porch, chest heaving. Callie knelt beside him, tears streaking her dusty face. Isabel clung to her, sobbing, hair wild. "We have to leave," Callie gasped, her voice breaking. "It's not safe, Eli. They'll burn the whole place down next time." Eli shook his head, wiping blood from his lip. "If you run, they'll catch you on the road. Out here, at least we have cover. I've got a few tricks left, and you've got Storm. He's worth 10 men." Callie hesitated, torn between terror and hope. Finally, she nodded, drawing Isabel close. "We'll fight. Together." Dawn revealed the damage. The barn blackened but still standing, fence posts splintered, water trough poisoned with something slick and iridescent. Eli's neighbors, drawn by the smoke and rumors, gathered at the edge of the property. Some, like old Tom and his wife, offered help, hammering boards, hauling water, whispering their support. Others just shook their heads, muttering warnings. "You're making yourself a target, Ren," one man said, his eyes darting nervously. "That reward is no joke. Blair's crew won't give up." Eli stared him down. "A good man doesn't turn his back on folks who need him. Maybe the rest of you forgot." A flicker of shame crossed the man's face. He turned away, leaving Eli and Callie alone in the ruined yard. That night, the three of them, 4, counting Storm, ate supper in silence. Every sound outside seemed to carry threat. The wind through broken boards, the distant bark of a coyote, the creak of the house settling. But even as fear pressed in, something else bloomed between them: defiance. Isabel nestled in her mother's lap, Callie's arm around her, Eli's battered hands folded on the table. "They want to scare us out," Eli said quietly. "But this is our home now. If we run, we'll never stop running." Callie looked up, her eyes hard with resolve. "Then we stand." For Isabel, for all of us. Storm nickered from the barn, as if in agreement. The prairie outside was still dangerous, but within the battered walls of the Wren Ranch, hope, raw and battered, refused to die. The days ahead would test every ounce of their courage, but together they would fight for the only home they had left. Sunrise found Eli Wren already moving, battered and limping, but undeterred. The barn still smelled faintly of smoke, the wounds of the previous night's attack raw and fresh across the ranch. Callie was outside, hair tied back, her expression set with a steely resolve that Eli couldn't help but admire. She'd been up before dawn, scrubbing the troughs clean and laying out breakfast for Isabel, her hands never stopping for a moment. Fear no longer ruled her. Something harder, sharper, had taken its place. After coffee and a hushed breakfast, Eli laid it out for her. "They'll be back, and next time, it won't just be fire. We need to prepare. I can't do this alone." Callie nodded, her eyes flicking to Isabel, who played quietly in the next room, stacking wooden blocks as if she didn't sense the dread pressing in from every side. "What do you need me to do?" Eli outlined the plan. Fortify the house and barn, hide supplies, keep Isabel out of sight at all times. "And you'll learn to shoot," he added, laying a battered old rifle on the table. Callie hesitated only a moment before nodding. Her hands trembled as she picked it up, but her voice was steady. "Show me." They spent the morning in the back pasture, using fence posts as targets. Eli's lessons were gruff but patient, correcting her grip, her aim, her breathing. Callie's first shots went wide, but she listened, improved quickly, and soon found her rhythm. "I can do this," she said, more to herself than to Eli. "I have to." Midway through the morning, the rumble of wheels on gravel caught their attention. Eli tensed, rifle at his shoulder, until he recognized the battered blue pickup. Ryan, a young neighbor with an eager, serious face, stepped out, holding a box of canned food. "Figured you might need a hand," Ryan said, glancing around at the scorched barn and the fresh barricades Eli was nailing up over the windows. Eli grunted his thanks. He'd known Ryan since the boy was small, watched him grow up wild and stubborn, always eager to prove himself. Now, Ryan moved with a sense of responsibility Eli hadn't seen before. "You sure about this?" Eli asked, lowering his rifle. "No one would blame you for keeping your head down." Ryan squared his shoulders. "If folks like you give up, what's left for the rest of us? I can shoot, and I know how to rig some traps." With Ryan on board, the work moved faster. They reinforced the barn doors, hammered boards across the windows, and set up makeshift alarms with pots and strings, anything to buy a few seconds' warning if Blair's crew returned. Inside the house, Callie moved quickly and efficiently, showing a knack for hiding food and supplies in the least obvious places. She turned Isabel's closet into a safe room, piling in blankets, water, and a slingshot for good measure. Eli also took time to gather evidence. He found the shell casing from the attack, snapped photographs of Blair's boot prints in the mud, and jotted down every detail he could recall, just in case the law ever cared enough to intervene. He kept his battered cell phone charged, hoping it would be enough to record proof if Blair or her men showed up again. By the second afternoon, the ranch felt more like a fort than a home. Storm sensed the tension, his ears twitching at every strange sound, his bulk a comforting presence near the porch. Isabel spent hours by the mustang's side, braiding his mane, whispering stories into his ear. Storm would nuzzle her gently, the two of them seeming to find comfort in each other's company. Callie practiced with the rifle until her shoulder ached, her shots growing steadier, more confident. One afternoon, as Eli watched her line up another shot, he said, "You're a quick study." Callie gave a short, bitter laugh. "Desperation's a good teacher." Inside, Ryan and Eli mapped out escape routes and fallback positions. "If things go bad, you two take Isabel and head out the back through the old irrigation ditch," Eli instructed. "Ryan knows the way. Don't wait for me if it comes to that." Callie bristled, unwilling to accept the idea of leaving Eli behind. "We stick together. That's the only way any of us makes it." Eli didn't argue. He just squeezed her shoulder once, gratitude in his tired eyes. As dusk fell, the tension coiled tighter. Ryan patrolled the yard with his shotgun. Eli cleaned and reloaded every weapon in the house, and Callie packed a small bag for Isabel, just in case. Supper was a silent affair, everyone listening for signs of movement outside. Storm, always attuned to danger, was restless. That night, he refused to stay in the barn, pacing instead beneath the windows, ears flicking, his body a living alarm system. Several times, he whinnied sharply, drawing everyone to the windows, hearts pounding, but each time it was only the wind, or a jackrabbit darting through the grass. Yet every small scare kept them on edge. Just before midnight, the phone rang. Eli's blood ran cold. He picked it up, expecting threats. Instead, a gravelly voice on the other end whispered, "Sheriff's in town. He heard about the fire. If you've got proof, now's the time to use it. Folks are scared, but some will help if they see you're in the right." Eli hung up, hope flickering in his chest. Maybe, just maybe, they weren't as alone as they thought. As the moon rose, Eli took his post on the porch. Ryan guarding the back, Callie curled around Isabel in their makeshift safe room. Storm stood sentry, eyes flashing silver in the night. Every creak, every breeze set them all on edge. But they were ready. Ready for the fight they knew was coming. Ready to defend what little they had left. And in that tense, watchful silence, something strong and unbreakable began to form. A family forged not by blood, but by the choice to stand together, no matter what darkness prowled the prairie. The prairie held its breath as dusk bled into night. Shadows gathered thick and restless around the barricaded Wren Ranch, swallowing every familiar landmark and stretching the darkness until it felt endless. The house glowed faintly, a lone, defiant beacon on a sea of fear. Inside, every sense was sharpened, nerves stretched to the breaking point. Ryan sat near the back door, shotgun resting on his knee, eyes darting to every creak. Callie moved quietly from room to room, double-checking the barricades, packing water and crackers into Isabel's canvas bag. Eli stood by the window, rifle in hand, scanning the moonlit pasture. Storm's silhouette patrolled the yard, ears pricked, every muscle taut. The Mustang would pause, nostrils flaring, as if he could smell danger drifting on the wind. Isabel clung to her rag doll, her mother's warnings echoing in her mind. Stay close. Don't run. Be brave. The hours crawled by, thick with expectation. A coyote yipped in the distance and everyone froze, listening. Then, nothing. Just the sound of the wind rattling the loose boards and the slow tick of Eli's old clock. Even the air inside felt thin, as if the house itself was holding its breath. Around midnight, the real storm broke. It started with a flicker, light at the edge of the yard, torches bobbing like fireflies in the darkness. Then came the roar of engines, the harsh bark of laughter, and the sound of boots crunching gravel. Blair's crew had arrived, more men this time, their voices bold and cruel in the night. "Come on out, Wren!" Blair's voice rang out, echoing across the fields. "You've had your fun. Hand the woman and her brat over, and we'll let you keep what's left of your house. Otherwise, we'll burn it all to the ground." Eli's heart hammered. He signaled to Callie and Ryan, moving fast. Ryan took up his post near the back window. Callie gathered Isabel, pressing her close, her own hands shaking, but her eyes were fierce. Blair's men fanned out, circling the house. Glass shattered as a brick smashed through the front window. Torches sailed onto the porch, flames licking at the wood. Eli returned fire, shots cracking in the night. Ryan's shotgun boomed, scattering a pair of attackers near the barn. The house became a fortress of chaos. Smoke curled under the doors, and the glow outside grew brighter. Isabel whimpered, but Callie held her tight. "We're okay. I've got you. I'm not letting go." Suddenly, someone tried to force the back door. Ryan braced it with his shoulder, gritting his teeth as the hinges groaned. Eli shouted for Callie, "Go, now!" And she raced down the hallway, clutching Isabel, heading for the escape route through the pantry floor. As Callie hustled Isabel into the crawl space, Storm appeared at the kitchen window, wild-eyed, pawing at the ground. The Mustang let out a piercing scream and charged the attackers at the rear of the house. Blair's men staggered back, startled as Storm barreled through, scattering torches and kicking up clouds of dust. Ryan took his chance, slamming the door shut and firing twice, forcing the men to dive for cover. Eli, still at the front window, saw Blair herself emerge from the shadows, pistol in hand, her face twisted with rage. "You think you can outlast us, old man?" "This is the end of the line," she yelled. Eli fired, the shot grazing Blair's arm. She cursed, ducking behind a wagon. Her men pressed forward, but Eli held his ground. Inside, the fire was spreading. Smoke filled the kitchen and stung his eyes. Meanwhile, Callie and Isabel crawled through the dust and splinters under the house. Callie's heart pounded in her ears. Isabel was coughing, but silent, trusting her mother. They emerged in the barn, where Storm was circling protectively, blocking the entrance with his body. Callie scrambled to her feet, lifting Isabel onto Storm's back. "Hold on tight," she whispered, her voice trembling. Isabel clung to the Mustang's mane, tears streaking her cheeks. Back at the house, Ryan was pinned behind the overturned table, gun empty. He glanced at Eli, shaking his head. "I'm out!" Eli tossed him a spare rifle, then ducked as a bullet shattered the oil lamp above his head. Smoke thickened, flames eating at the porch. The odds were turning. But then, shouts in the darkness, another set of headlights bouncing down the rutted road. Neighbors. At first just Tom and his sons, armed with hunting rifles. Then more. Ranchers from across the county, drawn by the fire and the echoing gunshots. The tide began to turn. Blair saw the reinforcements and screamed, "Fall back! Fall back!" Her men hesitated, then scattered, some firing wild shots as they fled into the grass. Eli burst from the smoke-filled house, coughing, eyes red, but alive. Ryan stumbled after him, limping but unbroken. Together they rushed to the barn, where Callie and Isabel waited on Storm's back. Neighbors poured water on the flames, doused torches, and surrounded the battered house. The prairie, so recently an enemy, now felt like an ally, its people rising to stand with Eli and his fragile makeshift family. Callie slid from Storm's back, clutching Isabel, who was pale but unharmed. Eli wrapped them both in his arms, holding on tight. Relief nearly breaking him. Storm nudged them gently, snorting as if to say, "It's over, for now." That night, as the first light of dawn painted the horizon, the Wren Ranch still stood, scarred but not defeated. Eli, Callie, Isabel, Ryan, and Storm had survived the longest night. And in the ashes of the old porch, among the burned boards and broken glass, something new had been forged, a sense of hope and a bond that even violence could not break. But Eli knew it wasn't quite finished. The prairie didn't forgive or forget, and in the smoky aftermath, the lines between neighbor and stranger, friend and enemy would be redrawn. Yet as he looked at Callie, holding Isabel, and at Storm, standing proud in the pale morning sun, Eli realized the ranch wasn't just a place anymore. It was a cause. And now, finally, a family worth fighting for. Dawn broke in a wash of gold and smoke, illuminating the battered skeleton of the Wren Ranch. Eli stood among the ruins, hands trembling but spirit unbowed, every muscle aching from the night's violence. The air was thick with the smell of burnt wood, gunpowder, and the cold metallic tang of fear finally receding. Callie, hair singed and face streaked with soot, cradled Isabel, rocking her gently on the porch steps. Storm grazed nearby, blood from a shallow scratch drying on his shoulder, still vigilant, nostrils flaring with every new scent on the wind. The townspeople gathered as the sun rose higher, their numbers swelling, drawn by gunfire, by the smoke, by stories passed through windows and whispered down dirt roads. Some came with buckets to douse lingering flames, others with blankets or bread, all eyes wide with a mixture of shock and new respect. Eli saw the transformation in their faces. Where suspicion had once shadowed every glance, now there was a hesitant gratitude, a recognition of sacrifice, of someone standing up against the darkness when others had cowered behind locked doors. The sheriff arrived late, his truck trailing dust. He stepped out, surveying the scene with an unreadable face. His eyes fell on Eli, on Callie and Isabel, then lingered on the ragged line of men and women who had stood to defend the ranch. For a long moment, no one spoke. Eli broke the silence first, voice raw but steady. Blair and her crew, she's the reason for all of this. She's been threatening, burning, trying to kill us. You want evidence? There's blood in the barn, shell casings in the yard, witnesses enough to fill your jail. The sheriff's gaze hardened, but it was Callie who stepped forward, trembling but determined, Isabel at her side. You told the town I was a fugitive, that I was dangerous, but all I did was try to save my little girl. I ran from people who would have sold us like cattle to settle old debts. I never asked for help, but I found it here. The sheriff seemed to weigh her words, looking around at the crowd, at the battered faces, the neighbors with makeshift bandages, at Storm standing like a sentinel in the grass. He nodded, the faintest show of respect. That true? He called out. Anybody see Blair or her men? Tom, voice hoarse from shouting through the smoke, stepped up. We saw 'em all right. Busted through Eli's gate, set fire to the porch, shot at anybody who stood up. That's no way to run a debt. That's a war. Ryan, nursing a bandaged arm, spat in the dirt. And Eli saved us all. If he hadn't held the line, they'd have burned half the county. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. The sheriff nodded once, jaw set. We'll do it right then. Blair and her people will answer to the law. You have my word. He turned to Eli, softer now. Sorry I doubted you. Sorry I listened to talk instead of the truth. Eli nodded, not trusting himself to speak. The relief that swept through him was nearly overwhelming. A sudden easing of a burden he'd carried for so long. It felt like a part of his very bones. As deputies fanned out, rounding up Blair's wounded and frightened crew, Callie sank down beside Eli, Isabel in her lap. Her voice was barely a whisper. It's over. He looked at her, the lines in his face softening. For now, maybe, but we did it. You did it. Neighbors pitched in, fixing what they could, hauling water, salvaging supplies from the ashes. The ruined porch was cleared and new boards hammered into place. Children helped sweep up broken glass. Someone started a pot of coffee that filled the air with a sense of home again. Isabel, soot still streaking her cheeks, ran laughing through the crowd, Storm following as if to keep her in sight. Callie watched her daughter with tears in her eyes. She hasn't laughed like that in months, she murmured. I thought I'd lost her. Eli rested a hand on her shoulder, gentle. You got her back. You gave her a home worth fighting for. By afternoon, the ranch was busy with voices and movement, pain and fear replaced by purpose. People who had once crossed the road to avoid Eli now patted his back, shook his hand, pressed pies and jars of preserves into Callie's arms. For the first time in years, Eli felt part of something bigger than himself, something that reached beyond the boundaries of his land. The sheriff made good on his promise. Blair and her crew, bruised and battered, were loaded into the back of his truck. As she passed, Blair locked eyes with Eli, hatred and defeat warring on her face. But she was silent, knowing the law and the people were no longer on her side. The day faded into evening, the sky washed in pink and gold. The last of the helpers drifted home, promising to return with more nails, more hands, more hope. Eli, Callie, Isabel, and Storm stood together on the repaired porch, watching the prairie stretch away, scarred, but still beautiful. Callie leaned into Eli's side, her voice soft, but sure. "I thought the world had forgotten us, but you and these people, you showed me there's still good worth believing in." Eli looked at her, then at Isabel, and finally at the old mustang grazing peacefully. "Sometimes it just takes one person to stand up. The rest will follow if you give them a reason." As night closed in, the Wren Ranch glowed with the light of lanterns and the hum of voices inside. The darkness no longer felt threatening. Instead, it felt earned, a night of rest after the longest trial. They all bore scars on their bodies, in their hearts, but they had something more powerful, the knowledge that courage, truth, and community could turn the tide, even when hope seemed lost. And as the stars kindled above, Eli knew the worst was behind them. The fight for family, for home, had changed them all. Now, at last, they had a place and a future to call their own. The prairie was gentle in the aftermath, as if the land itself breathed a sigh of relief with every breeze that rolled over the golden grass. The scars of fire and violence still marked the Wren Ranch, charred beams in the barn, new boards bright against the old, black circles where the porch had burned. But the scent of smoke was fading, replaced by the sweet promise of summer flowers, the sharp tang of fresh paint, and most of all, the sound of laughter ringing through the yard. Recovery wasn't easy. Eli woke every morning with aches deep in his bones, his left arm still stiff from the fight. Callie moved a bit slower, her nerves raw, but her shoulders straighter, her eyes clearer. Isabel, who had clung to her mother's skirts since their first night at the ranch, now ran free, hair flying in the wind, Storm trailing her like a guardian spirit. Where fear had once ruled the house, hope now filled the rooms. Neighbors came and went each day, some bringing lumber or homemade pies, others just showing up to hammer nails or share coffee on the porch. The ones who had once warned Eli to give up now offered shy apologies or left baskets at the gate. The transformation was slow but real. The old ranch, scarred and battered, was alive again, animated by a spirit of hard-won community. One evening, as the sun melted behind the cottonwoods, Eli and Callie sat side by side on the new porch steps. Isabel was in the grass with Storm, braiding flowers into the Mustang's mane while Ryan fixed a broken latch on the barn door. The quiet was peaceful, but not empty. Eli spoke first, voice low and thoughtful. "Funny, isn't it? After all this, I find myself feeling grateful. Never thought I'd say that about a bunch of folks banging hammers and eating all my bread." Callie smiled, her hands folded in her lap. "You built something here, Eli. Not just fences and barns, something people want to protect, even if it took a near war for them to remember what mattered." Eli stared at the sky, remembering nights when he'd felt utterly alone. "Guess I never thought anyone could fill the emptiness my wife left behind. I thought I was done with family, done with letting anyone in." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "But you and Isabel, you brought life back to these walls. You reminded me it's not about blood, it's about who you stand with when things get hard." Callie looked down, blinking fast. "I spent so long blaming myself, thinking I was too broken to deserve a second chance. After what I went through, after the mistakes I made, I thought running was the only answer. Eli reached over, resting a rough hand over hers. You fought. You survived. That's what counts. The past can't touch you here, unless you let it. She squeezed his hand, and for a moment the weight of regret eased. She looked at Isabel, who was shrieking with laughter as Storm gently nudged her toward a pile of wildflowers. She's different now, Callie said softly. Stronger, braver. I think maybe she forgives me for all those hard nights. Eli watched the pair, a gentle pride blooming in his chest. Kids are wise. They forgive quicker than we do. Maybe we could learn a thing or two. That night, the house filled with warmth. Ryan sharing stories by lamplight, Callie humming while she braided Isabel's hair, Eli strumming a battered guitar. For the first time in years, Eli felt like he truly belonged, not just to a ranch or a piece of land, but to something living and breathing, a family, strange as it still seemed. A few days later, the sheriff arrived with a quiet apology and a peace offering, a bag of seed and a box of books for Isabel. Town owes you more than I can say, Eli, the sheriff admitted. I should have listened. Should have done better. There was no grand gesture, just a handshake and a look that spoke of understanding and respect. Eli accepted both, the anger he'd harbored dissolving like morning mist. We all make mistakes. The real test is what you do after. The community's support didn't erase the scars, but it softened them. Eli mentored Ryan, teaching him the old ways of ranching, and together they repaired the land. Callie organized a gathering for the neighbors, her first step toward forgiving herself for years spent in hiding. Children played in the yard, women swapped stories in the kitchen, and for one golden afternoon, the old house rang with the life it had once known. In quiet moments, Eli reflected on what he'd learned. True strength wasn't about standing alone. It was in opening your doors even when fear said to bolt them shut. It was in forgiveness, of others, and of yourself. And it was in risking your heart, even after you'd lost so much. One evening, after the crowd had gone and the sky was dusted with stars, Callie stood at the fence line with Eli, Storm grazing nearby, Isabel asleep in her arms. Do you ever regret it? She asked. Letting us stay? Eli shook his head. Not for a minute. Sometimes what seems like the biggest risk is just the chance you needed. She smiled, tears glinting in the moonlight. Thank you, Eli, for believing in us when we couldn't believe in ourselves. He touched her cheek, a gesture as gentle as the wind. That's what family does, even if it takes a little while to learn. The prairie, wide and forgiving, seemed to echo the lesson. The Wren Ranch, scarred, stubborn, and full of second chances, was home now. Not just for Eli, but for all who chose to belong. And as the night deepened, carrying dreams of forgiveness and hope, Eli knew that sometimes the hardest battles left the brightest dawns. Months passed, and with each sunrise the Wren Ranch grew stronger, shedding the scars of that violent summer like an old snakeskin. The fields, once blackened by fire, burst forth in stubborn wildflowers and tall green grass. New fence posts stood tall where the old had burned, and laughter came easier now, carried on the wind from house to barn, from porch to paddock. Eli Wren, a man changed by hardship and hope, had grown into his new role with a quiet pride. He moved a bit slower, silver in his beard and stiffness in his stride, but there was a peace in his eyes, a light that had been missing for too many years. He spent mornings with Storm, the mustang now a living legend among the neighboring ranchers, guiding the spirited horse and a small herd of rescues across the rolling prairie. Callie found her rhythm too, rising before dawn to pack Isabel's lunch, check the hens, and tend the vegetable garden that had miraculously survived the summer's turmoil. The days of hiding and running felt far away, replaced by purpose and simple joys. She and Eli often shared quiet moments after chores, hands stained by work, hearts lightened by laughter and shared burdens. Isabel, strong and healthy, had become the darling of the county, her bright smile and fierce spirit winning over even the most standoffish old-timers. She spent hours with Storm, riding bareback across the fields or leading him by the reins as younger children watched in awe. If she ever remembered the fear that once shadowed her life, she never showed it. The ranch soon became more than a sanctuary for one small family. Word spread of Eli's willingness to take in those who'd lost their way. Troubled youths from town, kids scarred by grief, neglect, or bad luck, found a place at the Wren Ranch. Eli didn't ask for details, just handed them a shovel or a curry comb and trusted that the land and Storm's steady presence would help them heal. He'd teach them to mend a fence or ride a stubborn colt, always patient, never judging. The kids, in turn, grew under his watchful eye, learning not just skills, but a sense of belonging. "This place," one boy said, "feels like starting over, even when you think you're finished." Eli and Callie, with Isabel at their side, hosted gatherings under the big cottonwood tree, potlucks, music nights, storytelling around a fire. Neighbors, once wary, now came freely, sharing news and laughter as if the ranch had always been the heart of the community. On warm evenings, Eli would take out his battered harmonica, and Callie would sing, her voice threading through the night air, Isabel curled up against Storm's flank. There were quiet talks, too, moments when Eli would sit with a troubled teen on the back porch, listening more than speaking, offering wisdom born of loss and hard-won hope. "Family isn't just blood," he'd say, watching the sky go gold and purple over the fields. "It's the folks who stand with you when life turns mean. It's who you fight for, and who fights for you." Callie would echo those words, holding Isabel close. "We all make mistakes, but second chances aren't given. They're earned. You build a new life one honest day at a time." As the seasons turned, the ranch flourished. The land healed. The barn, once a ruin, bustled with animals and laughter. The townspeople whispered about Storm, the mustang that had saved a family, that had become a symbol of everything stubborn and good about the prairie. Children begged to ride him. Old-timers tipped their hats in respect. Storm stood patient through it all, as if he understood that his story had become part of something larger. Late one afternoon, Eli sat on the porch with Callie, the soft glow of sunset painting the world in shades of fire and promise. Isabel ran through the grass, Storm never far behind. The sky was wide and kind, a ribbon of light stretching into forever. Eli looked at Callie, his heart full. "Never thought I'd see the day this place was filled with laughter again." Callie squeezed his hand. "You gave us a home. You taught us how to stay. That's more than most folks ever get." He smiled, gazing out at the land he'd once thought was just a burden. Funny thing about second chances, they come disguised as hard work and heartbreak. But when you fight for them, really fight, they turn into something better than you imagined. That evening, the ranch gathered for one last celebration of the season. Neighbors and friends, old and new, brought pies, guitars, and stories. The fire crackled as Eli lifted Isabel onto Storm's back, and the little girl rode proudly around the yard, laughter trailing behind her like a comet's tail. Ryan, now a permanent hand on the ranch, played his fiddle, and Callie sang while Eli kept time with his harmonica. Under the stars, scars faded into memories, and memories into hope. As the night drew to a close, Eli spoke quietly to those gathered, voice steady and full of truth. Family is who stands beside you when the world gets mean. Courage is what you find when you protect the vulnerable, even if it costs you everything. And second chances, earned through hardship, are what make a real community. The crowd murmured their agreement, some wiping tears, others grinning in the firelight. Later, as the last of the guests drifted away and the world grew quiet, Eli stood at the fence line with Callie, Isabel, and Storm. The land before them was no longer just a stretch of earth and memory. It was home, a place remade by forgiveness, by courage, by the stubborn will to try again. The prairie night was gentle, the stars burning bright, and in that moment, Eli knew they had built something that would last, a true family, forged in fire and hope, strong enough to face whatever dawn might bring.